Good morning. It is wonderful to see you all here today. Just so you are aware, this is going to be the last Rector's Forum and the last breakfast that we will have. We're taking our usual summer break, so please, I know the food looks like it's almost gone, but eat it up. Please eat as much as you want with whatever there is and enjoy it, and enjoy this time that we have. I'm going to offer a prayer to get us started. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O God, whose days are without end and whose mercies cannot be numbered, make us, we pray, deeply aware of the shortness and uncertainty of human life, and let your Holy Spirit lead us in holiness and righteousness all our days, that when we have served you in our generation, we may be gathered to our ancestors, having the testimony of a good conscience, in the communion of the Catholic Church, in the confidence of a certain faith, in the comfort of a religious and holy hope, in favor with you, our God, and in perfect charity with the world. All this we ask through Jesus Christ, our Lord.
Amen.
That may have been a strange prayer to hear on a Sunday morning. That is a prayer that is actually an additional prayer that can be prayed at a funeral. I wanted to offer that because I think that it serves in some way a good intro or a good theme for our presentation for today. I am going to actually invite Sandy Peters to offer the introduction for our speaker for today, but I'm sure that this will be very engaging. So, Sandy, please.
Thank you, Nathan. Good morning, all. Before I get going, I just want you to know I have not been in a knife fight. I had some Mohs surgery done, and I'm recovering from that now, and all's good. But this morning, before I get into my remarks, I want to say that there are several members, there are a couple members present today, but there are also several members of this parish who have been trustees at Bellefontaine Cemetery that you're going to hear from Dan Fuller in a minute. And they are Bruce Miller, Luke Falk, Meredith Jones, Jean Mackey, myself, and today we have Dick Inglesman, who has been attending St. Peter's with his lovely wife, who are here today. And I just wanted to let you know that I am not the only person from this parish who is active at Bellefontaine. But this morning, we're going to hear from Dan Fuller, Master Guide at Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum. As you will shortly learn, Dan is more than just a Master Guide, and Bellefontaine is so much more than just a cemetery. Dan joined Bellefontaine in 2014 as one of 7 volunteers. Today, he knows more about this historic cemetery than almost anybody else and had now achieved the title of Chronicler. As trustee emeritus, I am pleased to say I am the first and only trustee emeritus from Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you my friend, Dan Fuller.
Thank you, sir. Make sure that I'm not sure how loud to get with this. So, as Sandy said, my name's Dan Fuller. I'm the cemetery chronicler at, watch my pronunciation, Bellefontaine Cemetery and Arboretum. People ask all the time, where did Bellefontaine come from? Well, you can ask those pesky Germans who arrived in the 1820s and 30s and can't say Leclerc, Chouteau, or Gravois correctly. So a lot of people want to put us into that French bucket, but we were actually named after Fort Bellefontaine, put in place by the Americans right after the Spanish vacated. The Americans did not want to be in downtown St. Louis. They knew they would not be well received, so they put Fort Bellefontaine up at the confluence on the Missouri side. And so the road led through our property. We're originally known as the Rural Cemetery of St. Louis, and shortly they will change it to Bellefontaine. We are the oldest garden cemetery west of the Mississippi. This concept began at Père Lachaise in Paris, France in 1804, and is a departure from the graveyard system to the cemetery system. Two distinct and different things. Graveyards, for the most part, are municipality-based, religiously based, or you'd have a private graveyard. Once you use the term cemetery, you're being more inclusive. And so another thing St. Louisans have wrong is Calvary has never been exclusively Catholic. When they were designed in 1854, sections 1 through 4 were for Catholics, 5 through 8 were for non-Catholic Christians, so that if you had a Baptist and a Catholic intermarry, they could both still be in an archdiocese cemetery. So they're technically a non-denominational cemetery. Both had to be Christian, one had to be Catholic. We, in contrast, are non-sectarian, and I find most people do not fully grasp that. On our 314 acres, you will find Orthodox Jewish, Muslim, Feng Shui, every flavor of Christianity. Yes, we let the Catholics in. I get that one all the time. German free thinkers, which are one of my favorite groups, believers and non-believers alike. On our 314 acres, we are also a level 3 arboretum, the first level 3 arboretum in the state of Missouri, with 10,000 trees, 650 varieties and cultivar, and 8 unique species you'll only find in an arboretum setting. Whenever we go outside the confines of the gates, we call it beyond the gates. And my title is something I want to thank Sandy and the rest of the board members for. A couple of years ago, they let me rewrite my own job description so I could focus more on the history and about a 2 million piece of paper archive, which is Bellefontaine. For every burial, we generate a low of 3 to as many as 7 pieces of paperwork. Bellefontaine Cemetery, where every stone tells a story. However, not every story has a stone. Of the 87,000, about 15% are unmarked. Why? Sometimes it's intentional. German free thinkers are notorious for not marking, even still to this day. African Americans of wealth during the Jim Crow era will choose not to mark because that put a bullseye on their family as having wealth. And then here's the big one. We are the gateway to the West. If I give each of you a spouse and 3 children, and I put you on a riverboat coming up the Mississippi in 1858, and as would happen, all 5 of you died in a cholera outbreak, who's responsible for your burial? The steamboat. They are authorized to liquidate your assets to get you to ground as quickly as possible because they don't know really what you died of. And they can liquidate their assets, their baggage, to offset that cost. If there was any monies left, those would be sent back to the next of kin, and it was their responsibility to send money back for a marker. How often do you think that happened? Rural or a garden cemetery. The biggest datum line, and this is where I have to put you into historic context, is you have to be an hour outside the city confines. And so Bellefontaine is a perfect 5 miles from the old courthouse. Horse and buggies travel 4 to 5 miles an hour. You are an hour away from the city. You actually left the city in 1849 at St. Louis Avenue. You went through the separate municipality of Bremen, and then just after that you hit the plantation-style homes, like just below us in our lower 100 acres, Athlone, which was belonging to John O'Fallon, and if you didn't know, the nephew of William Clark. Both John O'Fallon and William Clark are laid to rest with us. Just to the west of us was the Clay Estate, which would later become Calvary Cemetery. So this is our entry gate on Willow, which is the back of the cemetery. When designed in 1849, it's the Broadway side that's the front. It wasn't until really the 1980s that the major shift went to the West Florissant side. So the Willow complex, and you'll see quite a bit of flowers and trees and gardens, and again, as a level 3 arboretum, that is part of our DNA, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. So, jumping right into some of the people who are here, this is a Medal of Honor. We have 10 Medal of Honor recipients at Bellefontaine. Jefferson Barracks has 8. They'll catch up someday. 8 of our 10 are from the Civil War, and Fitz is an example of that. He and 2 other men received their accommodation on board the Cheeseman during the siege at Vicksburg. But, and you know, Sandy said I could get away with a little racy stuff here. It's his photography that is so enamoring. And so what we have is examples of his work. And I want you to realize this man died in 1903. So this is all 1880s to 1890s. And it's cutting edge because he's one of the first people to use a new thing called, proper vernacular, flashlight photography. So how did he do this? He had an assistant cut out paper butterflies and at the appropriate time drop it. And as they loft it down, with flashlight photography, you got an instantaneous exposure. 2 women. Not a man and a wife. This is the best one. Scantily clad female laying in repose, and she has a cigarette with a perfectly formed spiral smoke ring. How did he do that? He scratched the negative. CGI of its time. He died in 1903. His family put his work in the 1904 World's Fair, and he won medals posthumously. So death is not the end. Wildwood Valley is the first ever botanical garden setting in a cemetery in the United States. A little over 1 acre garden, currently has around 17,000 individual plants in it, and has 5 different burial options. We do a lot of fun stuff, my education aspect, but at the end of the day, we are a cemetery, and everything folds back to take care of our families. And it looks even better than that as of yesterday. I realize all the time I have to keep up with the maturity of the garden. Gene Mackey, who was mentioned before, was very instrumental in this program, along with a number of other of our board members, to create something unique and different in St. Louis, and a very contemplative place for someone to come and remember their loved one, whether they're in the garden or elsewhere in the 314 acres. Cascade Lake, this is one of those things, I love explaining this. We are technically not in the city of St. Louis nor the county. We're an autonomous 314 acres. And so we are not directly connected to MSD. So we have a 2-lake system which has a high level surface, and so that we get a lot of evaporation so that we do not have to pump up into MSD. We actually have 4 pump stations on our corners. So Cascade Lake, a few years ago, we decided to soften the edge, which makes this much more attainable for waterfowl. And since then, we've seen our waterfowl number go up. We now have identified 159 unique and different bird species coming to visit us at Bellefontaine. A few notable Episcopalians. Cicero Hawks and Daniel Tuttle are just a fraction of what we have. And I will tell you, I brought with me some handouts. If anybody is really into the history, I will share that with you. We have a very rich history with the Episcopalian Church. Trees, gotta love the trees. This is a former state champion tree. This is our American elm. As you can see, it takes few people to get their arms around. And if you know anything about elm, Dutch elm disease took the majority of them, 80% of them in the 40s and 50s. Every other year, this tree gets an inoculation. That's 55 gallons of a naturally occurring fungicide on a low humidity day so that the tree wicks that up through. That one inoculation, $10,000. It is subsidized by the family it's shading in the back. That's James S. McDonald of McDonnell Douglas Corporation. I always say if there was ever a Renaissance man in St. Louis, it was David R. Francis, mayor of St. Louis, governor of Missouri, ambassador to Tsarist Russia during the Bolshevik Revolution, secretary of the Interior under President Cleveland, but most importantly for us, in this photograph, opening on April 30th, 1904, the 1904 World's Fair. He hated the fact that the Columbia Exposition had gone to Chicago, and he vowed to get even. And so, if you know, 1903 or 1803 is actually the Louisiana Purchase. So why was our fair 1904? Well, David R. Francis was the one who worked his political strings and had it postponed. He wanted to give the grandest affairs, but there was another reason. And it'll never happen again. The Olympic Organizing Committee had awarded the city of Chicago the Olympics. And this man convinced our president that it would be weird to have 2 international events going on simultaneously, and they stripped it from Chicago, gave it to St. Louis, and the Olympic Organizing Committee will never let that happen again. If you're familiar with this building, he was governor at the time when it burned. Popular opinion at the time was to do away with Mizzou. We had other state-funded institutions. David R. Francis is the one who said, let's not be so hasty, and he put a board of governors in, which is still their governing body today. For that, they renamed the quadrangle, Mizzou Friends, Francis Quadrangle. David R. Francis. His statue, which is known as a perpetual mourner, is probably one of the top 3 visited spots within Bellefontaine. Ellis Wainwright, 3rd largest brewing family in St. Louis pre-Prohibition. The Wainwright building in downtown St. Louis was built for the SLBA, the St. Louis Brewing Association. While number 2, Anheuser-Busch, and number 1, Lemp, was producing lager beer, this English family was producing porters and ales for the most part. They'll kick over to lager a little later. In 1893, he lost his wife, Charlotte, and he had Louis Sullivan build this, which is known as the Taj Mahal of St. Louis. It's one of the most architecturally visited sites in North America. It is Moorish architecture with a perfect cube and a half sphere on top. And, one of the things that we'll talk about is the finance aspect. As Bellefontaine Cemetery, I think I just lost. BCA is a 501c13, and any of the spending that we do must benefit the entire cemetery. If we have a situation where something needs direct help, we couldn't really tap into that. So that's why a few years ago we created a Friends organization, which is a 501c3, so that if someone did donate, they can take that as a deduction. This needed some help. And, just to dig a little bit more into Chicago, this is at Graceland Cemetery. This is the Getty Mausoleum, which was done just a couple of years before this one. And as I always point out in my mausoleum presentation, this is a nice mausoleum, but this is a better one. Wainwright Legacy, the building downtown. All of this iconography is based on the hop because this was built for the SLBA. All the iconography at the Wainwright Mausoleum is to demonstrate the 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. Ellis, who lost a very young wife, did not want to think of life linearly. He wanted to think that after every winter there would be a spring. Elizabeth Roberts is our Titanic survivor. She was on one of the very first lifeboats off the Titanic and one of the last ones picked up by the Carpathia. When she rose to the decks of the Carpathia, she saw another St. Louisan in the form of Catherine Hurd. If you've ever been in a traumatic situation, having a familiar face is very important. And so Elizabeth gave a first-hand accounting of the sinking of the Titanic to Catherine, whose husband, Carlos Hurd, was a Post-Dispatch editor. The captain of the Carpathia would not let the story off, and so Carlos actually devised a coded message to the Hearst office in New York saying, send a ship to meet the Carpathia coming in. And it did. They threw the story overboard. It went by telex from New York to St. Louis, and the first-hand accounting of the sinking of the Titanic was published in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Every few years, we get the Titanic Society, who lays a wreath here, and at Catherine and Carlos Hurd, who is also buried with us. We are not historic and shut down. We are very active and considered cutting edge when it comes to the death care industry. And recently we debuted our Santa Rosa Labyrinth designed by Robert Fishbone. It is our first piece of outdoor sculpture. This is all laser cut granite and will be there for a long period of time. And a maze is different than a labyrinth. A maze is meant to confuse. A labyrinth has a planned journey that you go on. And with the Santa Rosa, it has this wonderful aspect of communing with the chakras of the body. It's a 7-layer labyrinth, and at the 4th chakra is basically the mind, body, spirit, and they all pull together on this. And here's a nice little view looking up. This is the component. So we'll say that grandma died and you want to kind of meditate on her. You take a photograph there and you'll notice when you come in, you're going to see and be reminded of her. As you make your journey, you're going to see her again and again. And when you come back, you see her yet again. all planned out. Sarah Teasdale is the first person to receive the Pulitzer Prize in Poetry. It was originally the Columbia Prize, and it persisted. And as a cemetery, I gotta love this prose. No one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly, and spring herself, when she woke at dawn, would scarcely know that we were gone. Linda Schrenka brings things to the contemporary. She is Orthodox Jewish. She was a very avid portrait painter and painter in many different mediums. This is actually watercolor. Anne C.T. Farrar, this is where I see Who Knows Your History. This is the half-sister of John O'Fallon and therefore the niece of William Clark. What you're looking at is one of our 17 undergrounds. When I say something is underground, it's a vertical drop. The stone in between moves on a pair of skids to reveal stairs that descend to a brick barrel vault 40 foot in width with over 45 full-body burials below ground. This was built in 1868 and is still a viable product at Bellefontaine. The family asked us to open it 10 years ago. We reviewed it. We identified there's no more additional space for full body, but it can definitely be used for cremated remains. And this is for the Farrar family. Bernard Farrar perished in the 1849 cholera outbreak. Kate Brewington Bennett, she was the wife of one of our early board members. She died from arsenic poisoning. This is the time when any measure of color in one's skin was not appropriate for a well-to-do society. So ladies wore gloves up to here, sleeves down to here, wide-brimmed hat, and for a little extra, a little arsenic under the tongue, which restricts the capillaries, takes the last of the color from the flesh. She died at age 37, and this is usually where the men start chuckling about the women doing anything for beauty. Just as many men died from arsenic poisoning. Why?
Syphilis treatment.
Victorian Viagra. It restricts the capillaries. Men were dying for sex, women for beauty, and nothing has changed. Historic past, one of the things that we were just able to do, and part of it from a $4 million grant that came from the state of Missouri, we have 14 miles of roadway, but we have an additional 7 miles of carriage pathways. And they are not suitable for automobiles because there's no more than 4 to 5 feet of width. But what we've been able to do is bring back a 1.8 mile walking trail from our Willow entrance up to the chapel and back. And that allows us to see the cemetery as it was actually designed to be seen, from green space to green space. And along the way, you will find up at our chapel about 50 different varieties of azaleas. The horticulture team calls it fireworks because, you know, they don't all go off at one time. It pops in June or pops in May. And there is no bad time to come to the cemetery. So we're looking at the George Taylor Mausoleum designed by George I. Barnett in spring and in winter. George Taylor basically entrusted the design of his mausoleum to George I. Barnett, who's one of the most prolific early architects, also buried with us. He ultimately was given the commission of the governor's mansion in Jefferson City. And this is the Humboldt Gate, which was the original front of Bellefontaine. And if you were at the cemetery, and I hope you come to visit, and you come in off of Broadway, you'll note that there are no monuments. And that was an intentional part of the design. You had just spent an hour by horse and buggy arriving. They didn't want to smack you in the face with the fact that we're a cemetery. So it's not until you rise this road, which is a 5% grade suitable for carriages, that's 1 and 2 horse rigs, that you would start to see the memorialization looking down from the hillside. John Barry Meacham came to us in 1854 as a free man of color, buried in a slave state before the beginning of the Civil War. When I say all are welcome, all are welcome. This man began life enslaved. He was able to secure his freedom. He ended up securing the freedom of his family. It's by this time he's in Kentucky, and he met Mary, who will become his future wife, and her enslaver picked her up and the family and moved to St. Louis, and that's what brought John Barry Meacham. John Barry Meacham, while he's in here in St. Louis, met Reverend Peck, who was in charge of the Wilderness. That was the Baptist church west of the Mississippi, and he ordained John Barry Meacham as the first African-American Baptist minister west of the Mississippi. The church that he founded is still with us today. Not the physical building, but the congregation. So this man got to work. He started teaching children of color how to read and write in the basement of his Baptist church. He called it the tallow school because they used tallow candles. And then the state of Missouri found out what he was doing and forbid it with legislature. Not to be dissuaded from his efforts, he created the freedom ships, basically a barge floating off the banks of the Mississippi and therefore outside the reach of the state of Missouri, and continued to teach children of color how to read and write. This man died in mid-sermon at the pulpit in 1854 and came not to the back of Bellefontaine, which is the West Florissant side, but the Broadway side. And there was, to be honest, an attempt to keep that from happening. For about 24 years, there is paperwork that said we shouldn't do that. But from doing what I do as a chronicler, I found that John Richard Anderson and Grace Montague were also buried in that time as free people of color before the emancipation of the enslaved. So sometimes it's better to do the right thing than the legal thing. Evergreen Meadow is one of our ultimate green burial locations. If you choose there, you must follow all the rules of the Green Burial Council. But more importantly, the whole 314 acres is open to a green burial. But if you choose to be here, you are giving up the one privilege of having a marker. And it's kind of a moot point because in our part of the world, 2 to 3 years, there's no tissue left. After 15 to 20, there's no bone. And so in the two designated areas, you're either becoming part of a wildflower meadow restoration, or in this case, a short grass prairie restoration. So you're becoming a part of the community, not just the human community, but the environmental community. William Clark is the most visited person at Bellefontaine, without a doubt. And he is also my poster boy for what cemeteries are all about. How many of you do family history or genealogy? Cemeteries are not based on death. We're based on arrival. It is a method of accounting. Our friend William Clark died in 1838, and he was laid to rest on his nephew's graveyard in downtown St. Louis, that nephew again being John O'Fallon. He got caught up with 54 other cemeteries that were deactivated and moved. He was moved to Bellefontaine in 1860. His burial date is 1860. Of our first 6,000 internments, 3,500 were reinterments from the original 54, and they bear the date that they arrived. If you're doing family history and you pass this 1860 burial date, because it doesn't coincide with your known 1838 death date, you just passed your ancestor. You need to contact the cemetery. That's what my volunteer force helps with. We can tell you where they came from. Now, if they were moved from us, I don't know where they go. So, William Clark. Adolphus Busch, we have a load of beer barons. Before Prohibition, there were 144 beer barons, or breweries in St. Louis. Right now in St. Louis, we have 150 breweries. We will always be a beer town. This structure was built in 1921 for $250,000. Its current replacement value is set at $7.6 million. And this is more historic context. This was built in 1921. Adolphus Busch died in 1913. And on this monument, it says, Vini, Vidi, Vinci. I came, I saw, I conquered. Most people jump to the conclusion that Adolphus is being pompous. He is not. His wife is protecting the memory of, as she called him, her prince. And why is he so important? This is the first vertically oriented company in the world. They didn't just brew beer. They had glass factories, rail lines, the whole 9 yards. In fact, Adolphus went to the Paris Exposition with Tony Faust, his in-law. And there they saw Rudolf Diesel's new creation. And Tony Faust bought the first diesel engine, bringing it back to St. Louis, and the first electrically lit establishment in St. Louis was Tony Faust's Oyster Bar. But Adolphus did him one better. he bought the rights of producing diesel engines in America. For 4 decades, in the shadow of Anheuser-Busch was the Busch-Seltzer diesel engine factory. Why is that so important? What happened in 1916? World War I. We had not a single ocean-going submarine. How are submarines powered? Electricity, initially by diesel, now by nuclear. Every L-class submarine in the World War I United States Navy was powered with a Busch-Seltzer diesel engine manufactured in St. Louis. What's the irony of this statement? Who did we fight in World War I? Thank you, Adolphus Busch. Her prince, Adolphus and Lily Anheuser-Busch. And we in St. Louis have a tendency of forgetting on that wedding day, it was 2 Busch boys who married 2 Anheuser girls. A little more of the book, Look Pretties. And again, I'm going to quote James on this because I still don't quite believe this, but we planted over 500,000 daffodils, and that was over the course of about the last 10 years. Now, according to James Faupel, our director of horticulture, he's done the math, and if they've been doing what they're supposed to be doing, we should have shy of 12 million daffodils now. So that's that compounded interest working for you. 159 bird species, and now you see why they like to come. Thomas Hart Benton. Anything west of the Mississippi with the name Benton is an homage to Thomas Hart Benton, Bentonville, Arkansas, Benton Park here in St. Louis. If you did not know, he's one of our first 2 senators. He was senator for 30 years, starting in 1821. And this is where we're going to check you just a little bit. How many of you know about duels? So Thomas Hart Benton, when he arrives in St. Louis, is courting the immigrant vote. He is an interloper. He has moved to us from Tennessee. Courting the native vote is the family that's been here for a couple of years, and they frown upon the immigrants, we'll say. And so their son, Charles, gets into a fight of words in a piece of litigation, and these 2 lawyers in opposing aspects call one another liars, which I find ironic. But later at the polling place, it is said from Charles to the people who are in charge of the voting that this man cannot vote because he hasn't paid certain taxes. So the exact words that this man says is, "Do not listen to this puppy. If you have questions of me, ask me yourself." And so now Charles's mother has been brought into it. Puppy in Victorian times is you son of a. And so they will face off in a duel, the first of 2. On the first duel, they pace 30 paces. And the way a duel works is they turn, aim, and wait for a man to say 1, 2, 3, fire, and then they shoot. In this first duel, Thomas Hart Benton was wounded in the knee. Charles was wounded in the throat. And so they asked if Charles wanted to continue because he asked for the duel, and he was in no condition, so they retired. And so they went back into St. Louis, and things calmed down for a short period of time. But over the next 2 weeks, it came about that Lucas was a senior to Charles, and that he was a better shot, and that the 30 paces benefited Thomas Hart Benton. So Thomas now challenges Charles to a second duel. And on that second duel, they paced 11 paces. They reduced the distance by 2/3. They turned, aimed, and the caller only said 1, 2, 3, never said fire. Thomas Hart Benton fired first. The shot went through Charles's arm, sending Charles Lucas's shot wild. He dropped to the ground, basically saying, "You have killed me, you have murdered me. I will not forgive you." Benton runs over to him. Words are exchanged, and before Charles Lucas died, he did say, "I forgive you." On his deathbed, when asked if he had any regrets in life, his only regret was the taking of the Lucas boy's life. And in true St. Louis format, Thomas Hart Benton is buried with us, and across the street at Calvary is Charles Lucas. This statue is in Washington, D.C., right up until a little guy named Harry Truman became president, and then they kicked him out and put Harry Truman in. William Beaumont High School, is one of our first surgeons, now west of the Mississippi. He brought with him a patient who had received a blast to the abdomen, and it had a fissure that never healed up. And so this man used the opportunity to do some experimentation. He would take little pieces of food tied on a silk screen and let it absorb into the abdomen 10, 15 minutes, do it another again. And then they took the digestive juices out and put it in a glass beaker and repeated the process, and therefore proved that the digestive system was both mechanical and chemical. And that is why there are still doctors today that use Beaumont's thesis on the digestive system. Virginia Minor, this is the most important one for the women. This is the woman who is the spark plug for the movement. The first suffragist organization in the United States was formed in St. Louis. And it is her case that will go all the way to the Supreme Court that will be the catalyst for the 19th Amendment. We have 3 generations of suffragists at Bellefontaine. Generations 1 and 2 never saw the right to vote. Generation 3 did. She is Generation 1. She died a full decade before the right of vote was given. If you've gone to the courthouse downtown, it went through an extensive remodel. It now has a full courtroom on the Virginia Minor case. And this is why that courthouse is so important, because the Dred Scott case began there, the Virginia Minor case started there, therefore generating the 13th, 14th, and 19th Amendments. And no building has given us more the right to vote than the St. Louis courthouse. Samuel Hawken, he and his brother give us the Hawken rifle. This is where I always like to clarify and introduce the fact that we, Bellefontaine Cemetery, are a part of historic St. Louis, which is basically 26 historic homes and ourselves. Hawken House in Kirkwood is not his house, it's his nephew's house. But that's okay, we still talk about it. Our red mulberry, considered to be one of those, again, former state champions, is the world's biggest bush and is a bird buffet in the spring. And again, part of the endeavors of our horticulture, I can never give too much credit to them. They actually have what I call a soldier in behind, because we know this tree will give way at some point in the future. And so we do have a mulberry there ready to take its place. I believe wholeheartedly that this tree was planted by someone in this public lot. You'll notice there's a very much lack of monumentation. This is basically in the 1860s. From here forward are about 200 people who died in the 1866 cholera outbreak, and there's not a single marker there. And for someone of meager means, planting a tree sometimes or other vegetation can be a marker. And I think that's what happened, that somebody brought that red mulberry in. And if you didn't know, St. Louis was known for its red mulberries right up until we got white shag carpeting. One of our endeavors as a philanthropic is Garden of Angels. We know where we are. We're in North City, and that's a hard row to hoe sometimes. Infant mortality in North City is 5 times greater than the balance. And thanks to our board members, 2 of which are here, we have been able to create a fund through our Friends organization that allows us to give a free grave and marker to parents who have lost a child under the age of 2. And we have made some exceptions for other incidents that have happened, therefore relieving the necessity for them to put money down when they probably don't have that money to put down. And then I just kind of closing up, because it's getting into summer, talk about Judy's irises. And one of the things that is so endearing to me about Bellefontaine, Judy fell in love with the cemetery. Her family was already here. She came to us on a regular basis. And she was an avid iris collector. She had probably the 2nd largest iris collection in St. Louis, only to be bested by Mobot. And so she struggled for the 4 last years of her life with cancer. She couldn't keep up with her iris garden. This goes all the way back to Kyle, who then went to her house and took 75% of her irises and brought them to Bellefontaine. And then as part of her estate and after her death, the other 25 percent came to the cemetery. So we have her iris collection, and it is an ever-growing collection that can be found throughout the grounds. And we placed many of them along the roadway where, when Garden of Angels was still active, those families would approach by so that they would have that pop of color. And if you didn't know, they have some very interesting names for these irises. And for those that are still not interested, irises is the core of sapphire gin. We do a lot of events, so here is our 5K. We do one in the spring, one in the fall. The suffragists are near and dear to our heart, and so we have a reenactment group that comes out on a regular basis, and that's exactly what the ladies look like in 1916 when Edna Gellhorn pioneered the Walkless, Talkless Parade. We had the Democratic Convention here in St. Louis, and 7,000 women dressed as such. And when the men went to the convention, the women turned their backs, voicing the fact that they had no voice in government. And then they are, of course, successful by 1919. But we keep that struggle alive, reminding people that things can slip away if you don't watch out for it. Virginia Minor gets anywhere from 50 to 75 I voted stickers every national vote. And I have been there when mothers have told daughters, do not take this for granted. This has been a 3-year project, and this is from the Right Reverend Johnson, who opened the orphan archive to us. We have 3 orphans lots associated with the Episcopalian Church, and 1 lot was completely sealed to us. But when he arrived, he was able to open that up, and we worked with Sue, who's the archivist for the Episcopalian Church, and we now have all of the information of these better than 60 orphans who are laid to rest with us. And what you're seeing, and don't get me in trouble, guys, this is an advance notice of what this potential monument might look like, with some scribbles already on it, and then these are the words from the Right Reverend Johnson as far as what he would like to see on that memorial. Right now, there is a cenotaph for a very early Episcopalian minister who was actually taken back to the East Coast after he died in that 1849 cholera outbreak I told you about. And so if you don't know, a cenotaph is, by definition, empty tomb. So there is monumentation with Griswold's name on it, but he's not physically with us. He is, like I said, in the Northeast. And so we want to be able to put voice to those quieted names. And this will actually help quite a few family historians, because these are not children that had descendancy themselves. So you can see by their ages that they were too young to have children of their own. But these are probably aunts and uncles and family trees that people don't know what actually happened. And so we thank him for opening those up to us. 177-year history, and we're less than half full. Well, we're going to be doing this for another at least 200 years, and that's why I was so adamant about the title being Chronicler, because it's not just the history and archive. We're also trapping the stories of the here and now. With that $4 million gate, we're bringing back online Hawthorne Gatehouse that allows us to deviate what's coming in one entrance, our tours and events, from the services. Again, the services are the precedent. It is what takes the most. And so we'll start the vent over here, and here are some more of Judy's irises. And then Amrith. This was a 4-room component, which is now 1 room, and is the new meeting space for our board. And I've been told that I can use this for historic societies and gatherings from a historic nature. This is an 1877 structure. It is our oldest above-ground building at this particular point. All the rest of the buildings that you see when you come to Bellefontaine Cemetery for our use are all after the 1930s. And that's who I stole things from. I know I'm getting pushed on time here. And the one thing I do want to point out is up on the windowsill, I do have a bunch of brochures. If you open it up to the middle, there is a map with a white line, and that white line is physically on the roadway, so you'll never get lost. All you got to do is get yourself on the white line, left or right. It's going to bring you back to Willow. So,
yeah. How about a quick comment on the bond?
Bond Chestnut Grove?
Yes,
Sure.
as well as Rush Limbaugh's grave.
Yep, Rush is with us. That's enough said. Christopher Gitt Bond, if you did not know, was an avid tree enthusiast, and he was very involved in repopulating the chestnut trees. So some years ago, we received a gift from him, 3 different varieties of chestnuts, one named for him, one named for his wife, and one named for his son. And if you go down to where Rush is located, there's actually a memorial placard there that identifies that this is the Gitt Bond Chestnut Grove. And there's all kinds of other things going on. I have only given you the glossy overview. So there is a lot more to be said. We have 17 different PowerPoint programs like this that take just a sliver of the cemetery. And I'll be around to answer any questions, but thank you for your time.
I think that we can take just maybe 1 or 2 quick questions if anyone has any right now. But if you don't, or if you don't want to ask now, as you said, that he would be welcome to speak to you afterwards. Anything? Okay, yeah.
Thank you for your presentations. How can we get some of the information?
We're on our website, Bellefontaine cemetery.org, and we're about to debut a new one in a very short period of time, but it's fairly user-friendly. It will get you to where you need to in the cemetery. There's also an app you can download to your phone that gets you to the individual graves, but most importantly, come and visit. And we have right now, I think Sandy mentioned that we started with 7 volunteers back in 2012, 2013. We now have 134 volunteers, and they will be more than happy to help guide you around.
Any other questions? Maybe time for one more. Okay, you're saving them all for him directly. So thank you to Dan. That was a wonderful and engaging presentation about the cemetery. Thank you all for being here. God bless you.